Good evening. We're starting the program. Please come in. Andrew, you got to come up on center stage. I am Tom Graff, Chair of Belltown United, and I welcome all of you to this candidates forum. We're going to start with Seattle City Council, and then at 7 o'clock we're going to take a little break and move on to the County Council. I, of course, have to thank Seattle Unity for the use of this incredible facility. Give them a round of applause, please. We asked everyone at Seattle Center, and we asked all these venues in Uptown and Belltown, and we could not get anyone to commit to this date for, a very minimum amount of money that we had. And Seattle Unity said, yeah, we're perfect. We can hold 200, and you can have your food, and we'll donate the space, essentially. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I just love this building too. There is another floor for events upstairs too, so it's quite a facility, and we're lucky to have them. Thank you very much. Of course, we have to point out the West Precinct Advisory Council Chair, Lane Ross. Thank you very much for working this program, and you've been the chair of West Precinct Advisory Council for how long? A decade? 12. Oh, since you were 12. She's been amazing working on the council, representing this entire district and working with all the constituents in our neighborhood. So I really appreciate what you do and what the West Precinct Advisory Council does. We do have other sponsors for tonight's event. Also, it's unusual that we just pulled in basically everyone in the district that we could find. So the South Lake Union Chamber has been a sponsor, the South Lake Union Community Council, the Queen Anne Community Council, and Uptown Alliance. And Rick is here. Please stand up, Rick. You have to stand up. He's their director. Thank you very much. So with that, I am going to introduce our fabulous moderator. I wanted someone who could ask questions and say, that's not an answer. And TV reporters are very good at that. So I asked Jeremy if he would do this from KOMO Television, Jeremy Harris. And he was kind enough to say, Tuesdays are my day off, so I can do it. It's like, wow. Except he did a story today anyway. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having us. And let's see, can you hear us? Is that coming through? No,
I don't think so.
Hello?
Let's see, can you hear? There we go. That sounds great.
Okay.
Check.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll be the moderator tonight. We're going to hopefully we can get through the questions in time that we can also have some questions from the audience if we get through everything. But let's start. We're going to give each candidate 2 minutes for opening statements, and they can kind of introduce themselves and say anything they'd like to at the beginning. And we will start with Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here, and really appreciate this coming together of so many of the community groups that make up District 7. From Queen Anne to Uptown to Belltown to South Lake Union. Really great to see so many people that have worked with so many projects on here in the audience. So my name is Andrew Lewis. I'm the Seattle City Council member for District 7, running for re-election. Really looking to build on the work that we've accomplished over the last 4 years, working closely with Mayor Harrell, working closely with my colleagues to advance a number of really critical initiatives related to public safety. Last week, Mayor Harrell, Councilmember Herbold, and I announced the launch of our new CARES department, the Community Assisted Response Department, Response Engagement Department, CARES, which is going to stand up a civilian alternative response to respond to 911 calls that police in every circumstance don't have to respond to, and free up police to go and respond to calls that only they can respond to, that they are trained to respond to, and that we need them to respond to. We just heard the budget presentation this afternoon, where a project that I worked with the Downtown Seattle Association and the Public Defender Association in setting up, the 3rd Avenue project, has been renewed for continued funding in the budget to have that work continue on 3rd Avenue, to have We Deliver care teams doing outreach, doing triage, resuscitating people if they've experienced an overdose. That resource is going to continue. It's going to be funded. And that is something that I'm really excited and looking forward to working with the mayor on the budget in this fall. Our park ranger program that we expanded last year through the Metropolitan Park District from 2 to 28 rangers. Our first cohort has been trained. They're out in some of our parks in the downtown core. We are working on expanding that service even further outside of the downtown core to other parks in our neighborhoods to make sure our parks are clean, safe, and open, to make sure our parks have a professional presence and that the rules there are followed. And I look forward to saying more as we get into the questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. And we'll go over to Bob. Do you want to go ahead? Opening statement.
Yes, Jeremy, thank you. It's good to see you again. Thanks, Tom, all the sponsors, Rick, Queen Anne Community Council, of course. I see John in the back. Thank you so much. By way of introduction, I'm Bob Kettle. A lot of you already do know who I am, but for those that don't, I'm a retired Navy commander. I served a career in naval intelligence. And for the past decade, first I was a grad student at UW's Evans School, and then became a volunteer, a civic leader, primarily in the public safety side. And then importantly, also became a dad in the past decade, which is the highlight. Not born and raised here, but twice I chose Seattle while I was in the Navy, and tonight and right now is my candidacy. I'm choosing Seattle for the third time because I believe in Seattle. Now, why am I running? I'm running because of my concerns with the failures of the current city council to address the main issues that we're facing today, whether it's public safety, public health, and homelessness. And it's really important to do so because these three areas impact far beyond that. You know, our ability to activate downtown, the viability of our public transport systems, our buses and the like, and also the sustainability of our post-pandemic recovery. It's so important. But I'm also running because of basically the failures of our incumbent to really address, show leadership, and really create that safe environment, whether it's for our kids, our families, our friends, and basically for our communities here in District 7. And that's so important because what it's created instead is this permissive environment that we have that underlines all our public safety challenges. So what I'm looking to bring is leadership with a North Star, leadership that understands that we need to have accountability and transparency, leadership that understands that we need good governance, that really brings in all the stakeholders, that is positive its engagements, and it's about getting the nuts and bolts of government done, city government done. So I'm looking to do that, looking for leadership that brings first compassion, but then also wisdom. We need to have it in balance, and we need that kind of progressive, pragmatic approach in our city. So again, thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, and my time's up.
All right, thank you both, and we'll get to know you both better as we go through the evening.
Thank you for Top Pot Coffee, too.
Yes. We're going to start with a couple questions about public safety. District 7 hosts many of the supportive services here in the city of Seattle, and I think people who live in the district, like myself, don't mind being in an area that hosts social services. But there have been several high-profile incidents this year, including 3 homicides at supportive service housing in District 7. What should the city be doing to ensure safety and security around these supportive housing facilities that are here in District 7? And Bob, we'll start with you.
It all comes down to, you know, we can trace this back, this permissive environment point, to the defund piece that was supported by the incumbent, Andrew here. Because what it's led to is the loss of officers. And that loss of officers is loss of capabilities. And that shows up across the board. And that goes to, that present goes to the idea of the permissive environment. So what ends up happening is that we have these challenges at that location, but then again, all across downtown, Belltown, our whole district. And that's the legacy of the current city council, which is unfortunate. I know we're having plus-ups, with CARE coming on board. I know, understand, and I support 28 park rangers, but really, I'd rather have 280 police officers back on supporting our community and our district, because that would make the difference, because if we have better response times, if we have that presence in the first place, then we're able to address these public safety challenges that you're referring to.
Thank you. Councilmember?
We need to build and support staffing models in our provider community that have been proven and shown to be incredibly safe. And we have a really great example here in South Lake Union at the Civic Hotel run by CoLead, where we have had no significant instance of violence, no significant contribution of nuisance to the surrounding neighborhood. My office never receives complaints. The people that CoLead is providing services for on that site are people who have incredibly serious public health challenges that in many instances, if they were unsupported in, for example, a homeless encampment location, could escalate and lead to situations where a homicide occurs or some other violent act where someone's a threat to themselves or somebody else. They're supported in that environment because we enter into the types of arrangements with service providers with on-site support to make sure that things are resolved, that things are de-escalated, and that when necessary, law enforcement can be summoned and resolve a conflict. We Deliver Care, the nucleus of the project we're working on 3rd Avenue. We Deliver Care got their start providing on-site security for co-lead hotels and motels to respond to this very problem that you're discussing. Not all of our service providers are equipped to provide that kind of on-site de-escalation and service. That's something that we need to continue to insist on and try to integrate into our contracting with all of our sheltering programs because it works.
Okay, thank you both. And a follow-up to that is several of the businesses in District 7 have said, when they call the police, they've been told, it would be good to hire private security. There's been some pushback on that by saying a lot of the problems are coming in off of the street. How does the city create a safer environment on the street as opposed to asking folks to subsidize private security? And also asking that through an equity lens, because if you are Amazon and there's 3 security guards per block, that may not be the case in every neighborhood in this district. So how do you increase public safety on the street element without asking private entities and residents to support through private security? Councilmember, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, when we were confronting that exact same public safety challenge in the 3rd Avenue corridor last summer, in the summer of 2022, we came together with the Downtown Seattle Association, with the merchants on 3rd Avenue, to really call the question on what specific service do we need when that disorder from the street, when someone in crisis comes into your business and starts harassing you, harassing your customers. And that was the origin of getting We Deliver Care on the street to go around and essentially an emphasis patrol of 4 workers to be summoned to these business storefronts to de-escalate a person in crisis that they were trying to get in or were in the situation, to escort them out on the street, to triage with the West Precinct police emphasis that's on 3rd Avenue for things that escalate to criminal conduct, where police need to get involved and need to escalate something into an arrest and remanding that person to custody. But I think what it comes down to is I don't think the business should be providing that private security. We Deliver Care is a service that we provide for as the City of Seattle in partnership with the business improvement area, but the city takes on a portion of that service. We should replicate and expand that model to business districts all over the City of Seattle. It's worked incredibly well. The business owners on 3rd Avenue are very passionate about this new service. We're renewing it in the mayor's budget. And it's a way that we can maximize the effectiveness of the police emphasis that's on 3rd Avenue by triaging it to the things only they can deal with, giving a new resource to people with lived experience with training in de-escalation and public health to deal with the things that only they can deal with.
Thank you. Bob?
Yes. First, as Andrew was talking about in the previous answer, he was talking about South Lake Union. The whole time I was thinking about my walks in Belltown, along Bell, 1st and 2nd, 3rd, where they don't have, a stable, safe environment around some of these housing providers, and it's really a stark contrast to the answer that he gave, and I think we should always be mindful of that. And again, it comes back to the loss of the officers. We used to have community police teams. I used to work with them when I was chairing the Public Safety Committee for the Queen Anne Community Council. Officer Larrabee, Officer McLaughlin, work with them direct so they can deal with these kinds of issues that you were talking about. But you know what? They're gone. When we had the Major League Baseball All-Star Week here, we were talking about traffic security, and I was learning from the police department that the traffic enforcement that I used to work with on pedestrian and traffic safety issues when I was on the county, the committee, is gone. All those motorcycle cops that you saw during that week were all Washington State Patrol. That's the legacy, and that's the issue that comes back to these businesses being in that situation. And so yes, they should not be relying on private security. And so what we need to do is we need to stem the tide of that loss for those officers that are retiring, those that are going to other jurisdictions, and we need to build it back. And the way we build it back is with better leadership that shows that they understand what's going on and resets the tone and really gives an opportunity to undo the damage of the last 4 years.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, and we'll give you a 2-minute response as if it's a new question, then we'll go with you. But along those lines, Bob, there have been serious scandals in the Seattle Police Department in the last month and a half, and there's some legitimate questions about accountability in that department. How do you restore the public's faith in Seattle Police while at the same time trying to compensate for all of those officers who've left, and the hiring is not replenishing the officers at the rate they're leaving right now? How would you restore as a council?
Well, I think I know where you're going back, and again, it's about leadership. It's about being fair. It's about holding accountable. The accountability and transparency piece that I talked about. I am pro-police. We need to get back up to the mayor's 1,400 number that we need to have, but there's times where we have to call things out. I don't see her here, but Victoria Beach, who I work with regarding the African American Community Advisory Council. I went to her meeting at Garfield Community Center, and there was representatives from the South Asian community there. And I stood up at the end and I said, hey, it's important for people like me who are in the public safety space to stand up and say, hey, and particularly as a retired naval officer, and say, hey, what was said was abhorrent by Officer Otterer. It was tragic, it was wrong, and OPA needs to investigate. And I said, hey, this goes to the idea of conduct unbecoming, because there's different pieces. The UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 133 is conduct unbecoming an officer, and that's clearly what it was. And we need to be able to call that out. But if you do it in the right way, and you fair, and you just the facts, then we can move forward. And I think that's what we need to do, and that's what we need to look from the SBD's leadership too. So when I'm on the council, I will be holding Chief Diaz, Captain Strand in West Precinct, Captain Brown in the South Precinct, all these officers that I've worked with over the years, and we'll do that.
Councilmember?
All right, well, I didn't really hear any ideas in that response, but, what I would just kind of say is all of us on the council dais have commented publicly to support the OPA's investigation into the recent misconduct. That is our role. I don't really know that my remarks about that strayed too much from what the challenger claims he would say that I haven't said, but we can disagree on that. What it really comes down to is making sure the Office of Professional, or Police Accountability now with the rename, has both the tools that it needs and has the public support to pursue these investigations to their full extent and to do it in a way that's not politicized. I think Mayor Harrell struck a really good balance today in his budget speech that myself and my colleagues attended, where he echoed a lot of the same remarks that myself and Councilmember Herbold have stated from the council dais about, definitely being offended by the remarks that we've recently heard in the press, but giving the space to the Office of Professional or the Office of Police Accountability to do a full and fair investigation, but making sure that we're monitoring how that process goes, because it is to a certain extent a stress test, given that there's pending negotiations on the extent of discipline accountability that are within the four corners of that contract. And we need to watch really, really closely as a council to see if there is a recommendation from OPA, is that followed up with by the chief? Does that expose certain limitations or shortcomings that are in our current system if it deviates from what I think we can see are general standards of decency that have been offended and that have violated the public trust? And if we don't have an accountability system that can give that credibility in the face of massive international condemnation, then we are not doing our work as a city council and we are not bringing our oversight to bear.
Thank you. And I'll ask a follow-up to that, and then Bob will give you a chance to answer as well. Councilmember Lewis, your challenger has been very critical of you for decisions made in 2020 with regards to Seattle Police Department. Do you feel like those decisions made during 2020 are responsible for the lack of officers in the department now, and what should be done to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that 2 years ago, I was very public about stating that the decisions that the council made, the previous council that I sat on, were not helpful in regards to defund the police, and I was very clear about that publicly. I think that it was a misguided attempt by the institution to deliver the kind of pushback and accountability that we were just discussing in the previous answer, and it was a way that was misfired and was not focused specifically on what we needed to be doing. I think you see a different approach in how the institution and local city government, the institution of the council and the broader local city government have responded to the recent controversies. There's been no calls to defund the police. There's been a focus on strengthening our civilian-led accountability system and letting that investigation play out to focus on the root causes of the challenge we're facing. And I think one of the biggest failures from the council engaging in discussions about removing resources and defunding the police department missed two things. First, my core motivation was to get some of the civilian alternative responses that I've been very passionate about for the last several years. We figured out a way to do that without taking resources from the police department. And that's the first thing, is we should have centered that work and not tried to set it up as one or the other, because you need both police and these alternative responses for that system to work effectively. The second thing that we did is we created a convenient opportunity for people like my opponent to give disproportionate blame to the council conversation around defunding, given that this is something that cities around the country are facing, right? We're not the only city that is facing a shortage or a reduction of officers. Obviously, it had an impact, but there's cities where there weren't calls to defund, where there's a reduction. Dallas is down officers. Fort Worth is down officers. There's cities all over the country, conservative, progressive. The King County Corrections Guild is down 20%. That certainly wasn't due to cries to defund the King County Jail. So I think that we just need to make sure that we have perspective. It was definitely something that I've taken accountability for, that I think was a bad decision. But I do think there's other external factors that are a big role here as well.
Thank you, Bob.
Bottom line, it was a massive, tragic mistake, and he's kind of admitted it, but then he unadmitted it. And what I say to people is that the defund piece that the city council, including the incumbent, took has created a 20-foot public safety hole, a massive hole, and we need a 20-foot ladder to get out of that hole now. And so I appreciate some of the things that the council's done over the last couple of years. I appreciate getting 28 park rangers, but that's like a rung or two at the bottom of that 20-foot ladder that's needed to get out of this hole that's been created by the city council to include our incumbent, who, when I was on the public safety committee 4 years ago, I would go to these the election district race forums and the like. And I remember Andrew saying, hey, yes, we need, to my point about community police teams, yes, we need more officers. We need to build out community police teams. And then less than a year later, he and his colleagues on the council took their action. And so, yes, there's happens in different places, but bottom line for Seattle and for our district, District 7, is that we have a 20-foot public safety hole that we need to dig out of with that 20-foot ladder. And that's the framing from which we need to look at this. Not get confused about park rangers. Again, I'd rather have 280 officers back than the 28. I support the 28 park rangers, but still, this was a massive mistake, and it's having impacts today. And it goes to this idea of permissive environment. That is the connecting thread to all this, is the idea of a permissive environment, and that created that permissive environment. The permissive environment allows drug dealers to operate with impunity on 3rd Avenue. That Andrew was shocked back in March when I read that quote in the Seattle Times. It allows the drug dealers to do that. It also allows the random acts of violence, this kind of lawlessness piece that comes out of nowhere. And we saw that at 4th and Lenora with the tragic killing of Ina Kwan and her daughter Evelyn. That is the legacy of that piece, and we need to dig out of it. And it's going to take a new council to do it with a reset and a relook and a new relationship with the police department, because we're not going to be able to rebuild the police department with the current city council.
Would you like a response? 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to respond in 1 minute. I mean, what I would say is, when I took office in January of 2020, when we had over 1,300 Seattle police officers, we had an appalling and shocking mass shooting on 3rd Avenue. I don't think that the degradation of social order that we're seeing in many parts of the city is directly correlated to the number of police officers that we have. There's something much deeper and much more systemic. What's happened is we've had a hypercharged decade of growth. A lot of the people that are in disorder on our streets used to live in single-room occupancy units. The tent encampments are the new single-room occupancy units. They are the places where, since we have not been able to provide a place for people to live who are in that kind of state, they congregate in our streets and public spaces. They have serious public health problems. They get into trouble. They cause trouble. We need to have a broader focus than just thinking we can arrest and remand every single person who is disorderly in public and solve the underlying problem. That's true if we have 1,400 officers. That's true if we have 1,000.
And Bob, we'll give you 1 minute.
I want to make one point very clear. Talking about, and I said this in the opening, the idea of leading with compassion and wisdom. The compassion piece, is, hey, we have empathy, we see where they are, but then we also need wisdom to say, hey, we need to take action. this idea, he's hinting at a bit that, it's the heavy police response. No, we want to give police every tool in the toolbox, but we want to lead with compassion. We want to lead with the alternative service providers and the like, to include those that are, private, like We Heart Seattle and, Uplift Northwest and street level. All these groups that are working great on the streets, we want to support them, and we want to build up as we're doing now. But again, we have to have this, and this goes, unfortunately, that we lost 105 days with the flip-flop on June 6th with the public drug use and possession law in terms of the ability to give the officers, in the state law, it says, by the way, it gives them the ability for referral for assessment and services. It was already in the state law, and that's how you lead, and you start with that piece first.
Thank you both. Staying a little bit on the public safety topic, our final question here, and Councilmember Lewis, you alluded to this earlier about the problems that Seattle's facing are also being faced by other countries or by other cities around the country. We're certainly not unique in many of the things we're facing. In Portland, Mayor Ted Wheeler's requested to have 96 state troopers come into downtown Portland to help. In San Francisco, Governor Newsom has sent in the California Highway Patrol to address rampant drug dealing. Would you support, or would you request, or you think Seattle should request help from State Patrol in dealing with some public safety issues in downtown?
I don't think that we're at that point. I'll say that. I don't think that would be appreciated by local law enforcement, candidly, to bring in a state agency. I don't know that in Washington that the Washington State Patrol has the same capability in that respect that the California Highway Patrol does in terms of the mission that they're engaged in and in the Tenderloin and other places around the response to fentanyl. I think that the place-based initiatives that I've worked on with the Downtown Seattle Association and with the Public Defender Association and the West Precinct have been focused on bringing to bear different types of resources than just different types of law enforcement. At the end of the day, like if we only have a carceral approach to a lot of these problems or an enforcement-based approach, the barrier that we keep hitting is the King County Jail. We're in a position where the King County Jail was just in the news last week, is down to basically a COVID level of booking again. And that has a severely limiting factor on the utility of purely enforcement and purely arrest to materially reduce the amount of disorder we see on the street. When we had 10 encampments all over the downtown core in the middle of the pandemic, and we had that same pressure before, that's when we created Just Care out of necessity. We needed a place other than the jail to put people with severe public health challenges so that they wouldn't be harming themselves or other members of the public. And we did it through the master leasing of hotels that were on their back at that time. I think we need to continue to look at those strategies. Tiny house villages, for example, are in essence a pop-up single-room occupancy development. In the meantime, they're one of our interventions that have the biggest and strongest utility to get people off the street and get them in a place where they're not going to cause harm to other folks. If we only rely on jail, or if we only rely on trying to use the King County Jail, one, we don't control it. Two, it's not always the best solution. Bob?
As I mentioned in that one example, we already have other police forces operating in our city, so it's already there. A major plus up right now, don't see that, but reminds me that we do need to plus up our police department. And I've not heard any ideas, but one from this current city council, but I would like to play off a program in the military called Retired Retained and call it Retired Regained, where we go back and look to see if we can bring these officers back to the force. Due to some rules, as I understand it, they couldn't really go back on patrol, but if they could free up officers, if they can do that other work that's needed to make them better in terms of maybe detective side or basically allow them to be better at what they're doing, that would be a great opportunity, because we need to stop losing those that are retiring or going to other jurisdictions. And so that would be something that I would do. The first week when I take office, I will say to the police department, hey, we have a reset of the council, we have new leadership, we're going to engage with you, we're pro-police, but we'll hold you accountable, and say, hey, for 1 year, for those that are looking to retire or go to another jurisdiction, please give us 1 year and see if we can change and then get a new environment, new positive place for the relationship between SPD and the city council. And I think that will go a long way to building up the force as we need it.
The city just passed the new drug ordinance that will go into effect next month. And Councilmember Lewis, we'll start with you. What are you looking for as a metric of success after having co-sponsored the new legislation?
Thank you. So the new policy that we put forward is a plan rather than just a statute. We have a commitment from Mayor Harrell, from the police department, both of whom have supported, well, Chief Diaz for the department, have supported the new ordinance that we have in place that's been signed by the mayor that passed on a 6-3 vote with Councilmember Herbold joining the majority as well. The policy has different underlying assumptions than the one that we discussed in June, where there was a presumption of resolving these referrals in the court. Where the city attorney was interested in trying to resolve the bulk of these referrals, through arrest and remanding to the court, charging, and working their way through the municipal court. As someone who used to work in the municipal court is not a place that's really conducive to efficiently or effectively resolving things. The policy that we have settled on in the new ordinance is to have warm handoffs from law enforcement to service providers, and to have that be the default policy and position of the city, reserving the right to arrest and remand to court for serious cases or people who have had repeated opportunities to not be a harm to themselves or somebody else in public, and to have folks face criminal liability in cases where they haven't had or they haven't taken advantage of those opportunities to seek assistance or help. This is a policy that's based within the constraints that we face as a city in terms of the capacity and ability to book into the King County Jail as a viable strategy. This takes stock of something that we've actually done quite well historically, which is develop this complementary service sector to law enforcement through agencies like Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion that have their origin in this kind of partnership between police and service providers.
And quick follow-up on that, what will success look like from this new law?
Success is going to look like less visible public drug use and more people utilizing services to get off the street and get well.
Thank you. Bob?
It's interesting. I like to start first with something that I often mention, and I think it's important to say right now that I believe that in order to succeed in public safety, we have to succeed in public health. We have to do that. And public health meaning primarily in this case dealing with the behavioral health and addiction challenges that we have. Because otherwise, if we don't succeed on the public health side, we're basically running to stand still. And this kind of dovetails to my point about leading with compassion and then the wisdom piece in terms of what do we not accept as our society, and do we look out for others in our community that have been harmed. So to have that balance, because right now we're out of balance. We had a perfect opportunity to do that on June 6th. But we waited 105 days, and what did we really accomplish? Not much. I would say, it was interesting when the mayor's bill came out. It was fascinating to see because he led right at the beginning saying state law already allows for the police officers to refer for assessment and services already. It also made the very important point that public drug use is a public health and safety threat to our communities. That's what the mayor's bill said, which goes to the reason why it needed to pass on June 6th. But we had 105 days since. And so yes, some things have been filled out in terms of some of the paragraphs, and supposedly we have a plan, but I call it a convoluted plan, because when you start adding all these different pieces to the plan and saying, oh, we need articulable facts and things like that, that creates confusion. What we need is leadership with clarity. And so my hope is that, and I believe it will happen, when the mayor comes out with the executive side, the directive, that will sort these things out. But I'm not sure, and part of it is, we had this false start really. We had 105 days loss. And how many people were killed due to overdoses of fentanyl during that time period?
Whether drugs should be illegal or not is now an issue in the past in Seattle. And we'll start with you, Bob, as council member, what would be your next step in fighting the fentanyl epidemic here in Seattle?
Well, the first thing is we have to have a city council that's working together and not like this, because once a city council that's working together, and by the way, we have an opportunity to create that in January, then this council can work in partnership with the mayor, which is so important. And to have that partnership, with the city operating in one voice, then engaging with the county and the state. for a whole host of reasons. One, on the state's responsible for mental health spending. Why is the state of Washington so low? Until a few years ago, we were kind of like an SEC football conference state. And I talked to Liz Berry. Liz Berry says, yes, we're plussing up. And in this time down Olympia, we've increased it with a B. Oh, that's great, but now we're in the 30s. We should be top 20, top 10. And that would create capacity on the public health side that I was talking about. But we also need to engage as a city properly with the county. Andrew's mentioned a couple times about the King County Jail. But what have we heard from the council regarding the shortfalls of the jail? Have they stood up and demand better? Have they demanded that the contract be fulfilled? Crickets. That's basically what I've seen from it. And so we need a council that's working with the mayor, that's working with the county, because the county has public health responsibilities. And by doing so, all hands on deck effort, we can build that capacity on the public health side. Because as I said, we cannot succeed in public safety if we don't also succeed in public health. And this is like an example where that comes through loud and clear.
Councilmember Lewis, next steps on the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Bob should run for the state legislature. I mean, that's the first thing that I'll say at the front of this. I mean, there's all sorts of things these other levels of government need to do and that I've been very proactive on. But at the end of the day, you have obligations to the people of your district to work with the resources that are directly under your control to make the biggest visible impact in your community. We have worked with the county on a number of things in my office. We were one of the authors of the crisis care legislation that is going to create 5 crisis care centers around King County. I worked with Gurmai Zahalai and Dow Constantine on that, both of whom have endorsed my campaign. We passed that in April, and we're going to work in concert to get those 5 crisis care centers set up so first responders on a 24/7 basis with no wrong door can remand people who are in crisis to get services and help for behavioral mental health, for addiction at these crisis care centers. We actually, I mean, I'm not surprised that my opponent hasn't gone and reviewed, the budget materials that we work on at the council. But we have put together statements of legislative intent to document the work that we do with the county on the jail. We are intimately involved with the jail. We have an ongoing contract with them. Some of these challenges with the jail are structural beyond just pounding the table and demanding that the county do something different. You need to collegially work with them to get to where we need to go. We're working with Executive Constantine and his team on a plan to rebuild the county campus that would result in probably a new jail being built that is a modern facility that is probably going to be smaller but more equipped for the challenges that we're currently facing because a lot of it is facility based. We're also working with them to try to recapture some of the salary savings that we can reinvest in things that are adjacent to the jail, like electronic home monitoring or some of the sheltering programs I talked about earlier. That's all been very public. That's all documented in the budget. I encourage my opponent to read it instead of, the cricket thing or whatever.
I'd like to give you each a 1-minute rebuttal.
Because it has been crickets, yeah. What have you heard? Tonight's the first time I really heard it. And where are we with King County Jail?
It's public. It's in the budget, Bob.
I'm talking about from you, Andrew. What have we heard? Where are we with the county jail? We're still where we are. And it's interesting, in terms of throwing out endorsements. And one of the things that was just crossing my mind is that 3 Council Member Sarah Nelson, Council President Deborah Juarez, and Council Member Alex Peterson have endorsed me. And that speaks volumes. And I just wanted to add too, by the way, about 2 hours ago, I was just endorsed by the IBEW 77. So we're making a lot of progress on this because they all know that we need new leadership, we need new partnership because it has been crickets, despite whatever budgetary pieces that Andrew's talking about, and we need new leadership, which will create an opportunity for Andrew to run for State House next time around.
All right, a 1-minute rebuttal, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, my colleagues that live in other districts, that's fine if they want to endorse Bob as long as they keep voting to advance my policies. And I'm very glad to have had the votes of Council Members Peterson, Juarez, and Nelson on a number of initiatives that my office has advanced over the past years. And if you have to throw elbows to get that, and they end up endorsing your opponent, so be it. The thing that I would just kind of state, going back to the crux of this, I've talked about the issues with the King County Jail very publicly on a number of occasions, including a debate with my opponent that many of you were at in Belltown just a couple of months ago. So that comment strains credulity. I would just say that my track record on actually advancing substantive ways to build regional cooperation through bodies like the Regional Policy Committee are very well documented. It's in the crisis care levy. It's in things like Just Care. It's in things like the salary savings from the jail in the early days of COVID. And I'm going to continue to do that work.
Thank you both. One of the things that many of us...
Can I have a quick follow-up on that really quick?
Sure, and then we'll give Councilmember a quick follow-up if he wants.
The whole throwing elbows thing just brought it back to my mind. Is, we were supposed to be throwing elbows after the June 6th vote to get a better product. And part of the reasoning for that flip-flop on June 6th was the fact of the criminal court. There is no criminal court in the new bill. And, basically, I think those elbow throwing was basically in the air. It wasn't really making contact with anything in terms of advancing different pieces. And so since the throwing of elbows has come up again, I just wanted to make that remark and note that point.
You can have a rebuttal.
Yeah, look, we got the mayor's support for a new bill. We added the public safety chair support for a new bill. We got the Public Defender Association on board to support a new public health-based framework for engaging with people who are publicly using. We created the ability that was in the one thing that was in the original bill to elevate that to criminal liability in cases where you really need to. But we put in place a commitment to actually go and enforce it. If something is just a piece of paper that comes down from the state, that's not going to get the job done. The nitty-gritty of actually enforcing the law and enforcing policy lands on us at the City of Seattle. It's something that we need to spend more time on, candidly. It's something that I've made the definitive part of my council career. If we need to take some extra time to make sure we get a commitment to actually make a material felt difference on the street, that's something I'm going to continue to do.
I want to ask you both your opinions on the amicus brief filed by the City Attorney's Office on the Grants Pass homelessness case. Do you support that?
I don't think that it gets to really the crux of what we need to do. I mean, the city attorney's an independent office holder. They can decide to enter into litigation at their own volition. But I think that we're going to continue to have these challenges around camping in public and around civic disorder until we figure out some way to have people in the community have a place to go who are facing those kinds of challenges. If we just move people around without some kind of tiny house village or single room occupancy housing, and the comprehensive plan comes up next year. That's a big opportunity for us to create that kind of housing. We used to have a lot of it in the city of Seattle. We made it illegal in the previous generation. And the result of that has been, if you're completely indigent, there are no single room occupancy units. We made micro units illegal 10 years ago because paradoxically, they were too popular. And people were worried about the parking pressure that would put on the neighborhood. So we need to make those types of living arrangements legal again. We're a big city. We're a big city where not everyone can afford a one-bedroom apartment. And service providers cannot subsidize things that are at a one-bedroom apartment. So having more things that are in that micro and single-room occupancy housing so that people have a place where they can be, where they're inside, where they're not outside in the community getting into trouble or causing problems, that's something that needs to be a focus of our planning. And that's something that I think we need to see in the comprehensive plan. If the Boise decision, which is essentially what you're asking, the city attorney signed on to a brief to essentially have the Boise decision repealed, I don't know that it's going to really substantively make a considerable difference in the community. It doesn't get to the crux of what the challenge we're facing is.
Thank you, Bob.
Like the Boise decision, one of these things is really understanding it, like criminal versus civil, in terms of, what it really applies to. And this is like an in-depth legal piece. And I think it's good to engage on this because it's important to, as a ruling comes down, you have the swing. I talk about pendulum theory all the time. Things swing too far one way, swing back too far the other. And doing this amicus brief, and I've not read it, but the intent may be to get some guardrails in terms of exactly how this is going to play out on the ground in our cities, in our district. And so if it helps that in terms of getting some clarity on that side, then I support it.
All right, thank you both. We're moving on a little bit. Districts or neighborhoods across District 7 are going to be watching the Sound Transit decisions with the expansion of light rail very closely because it will not only impact the future of the neighborhoods, but it's also going to impact us all while the construction happens. What are your priorities? And Bob, we'll start with you on this. What are your priorities as a potential city council member for Sound Transit and their future planning through District 7?
You know, one of the things about good governance is about, you know, engaged leadership that's bringing in all the stakeholders. We need to talk to all the neighborhood councils, the neighborhood organizations, and get their input on the impacts, the true impacts that the planners may not truly appreciate. And that's a concern for me. Obviously, this is a move forward in terms of the public transportation, but what is the impacts? You know, what is the impact on Republican Street, you know, in Uptown? You know, extremely long period of time that it would be knocked out of commission, possibly. Is that what we want? Is there ways that we can mitigate it? Is there ways that we can ameliorate it and move forward while still accomplishing the goal? But that requires a city council that's engaged with all the neighborhoods in its district, and ST3 really kind of goes through all of them. And so that's the kind of thing that we need. We need leadership on the city council that's engaged with the neighborhood councils, the neighborhoods themselves. And I'm going to be bringing that perspective to the city council. That's what I'm going to be looking to do, because I had 8 years on the Queen Anne Community Council, where obviously I worked public safety since I chaired the committee, but I was also there for transportation committee meetings and others, parks, land use and the like. And we really need to have a voice on the city council that really brings that neighborhood look and experience there. And that's something, you know, ST3 is a perfect example where we need that, so because we need to have those voices heard and understand the impacts before we move forward.
Well, I'm glad that Bob very accurately described exactly what my leadership style on Sound Transit 3 has been, is the first thing that I'll say. And there's people in this room who could attest to that, because I've worked very closely with the Uptown Alliance. I've worked very closely with South Lake Union Community Council, South Lake Union Chamber, throughout Downtown Seattle Association, throughout this process, as all of the constituencies that are along the Sound Transit 3 route. The thing that has been frustrating about Sound Transit 3 has not been that community outreach. We've had great discussions about the impacts as far as the two different Republican station options, weighing the trade-offs in terms of the impact to KEXP at one location, impact to Seattle International Film Festival at the other location, what the impacts of the different tunnel configurations are to our performance venues, our legacy performance venues on the Seattle Center campus during construction. Or the reverberation's going to make it so that the Seattle Opera, for example, is not going to be able to continue to operate during that time because of the impact of construction, an institution that just got out of the fire from COVID and then just throwing it into the frying pan for Sound Transit 3 in that process. These are all the things that we really need to focus on. And that I have been focused on. But the frustrating thing, I alluded earlier, there will be a frustrating thing, has been figuring out how, as a city council, we can maximize our impact on this regional body that makes the final decision. Seattle City Council does not make the final decision. We did pass a resolution, and my colleague, Councilmember Peterson, was very, very helpful at incorporating in full the input of myself and my constituents in terms of our preferences in District 7 for station alignment and everything else. But ultimately, it rests with the Sound Transit Board. What that has then come down to is working with people like Rick, working with people like John Keno, who was here earlier, to produce my friends who serve on the Sound Transit Board to come down and take tours in these neighborhoods and at these sites to get a better sense for what these trade-offs are. And that's what I will continue to do as a district representative.
Thank you both. I would like to open it up for some public questions. We're about that time. And then after the, we'll take just a few, and then we will give you each an opportunity to do a 2-minute closing statement.
I'm going to give the mic to someone who has a burning question in their hands. We'll start right over here. Go ahead and announce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Kelly Charlton. I live in Queen Anne. 100 years ago, during the Great Depression, there were some major works programs, the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration, that created jobs and job training programs for people that don't have work. So what percentage of the approximately 11,000 homeless people in King County would qualify for a program like that? And would a program like that work in Seattle and King County?
Yeah, I can answer that one first. I love that question because I love the Civilian Conservation Corps. You know, just a wholly beneficial enterprise during the Depression that built, you know, I mean, here in Seattle, a lot of our community centers, a lot of our parks, a lot of our trails. In the legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps, we have a program in the city of Seattle called the Seattle Parks Conservation Corps that does recruit and train people from backgrounds, including people who are experiencing homelessness, who are exiting, in the process of exiting, experiencing homelessness and getting back on their feet, giving them employment and an opportunity to work with parks on projects very much akin to what the Civilian Conservation Corps worked on. The origin of the idea is from the Civilian Conservation Corps. When I presided over the renewal of the Seattle Metropolitan Park District, one of the things we did, working with Councilmember Strauss, was expand the Conservation Corps to include more slots and to amplify the opportunity. You know, Bob and I were just this morning at an event for Uplift Northwest, which engages in very similar work of providing jobs and opportunity to people who have been experiencing homelessness and are exiting homelessness. So I think there are ample opportunities both in government and in the nonprofit sector. Another good example I'll raise, a lot of ambassadors for the Downtown Seattle Association for the MID are folks who previously have experienced homelessness and are now employed by the Metropolitan Improvement District. So there are lots of opportunities for that kind of work that's in that same spirit of what the Civilian Conservation Corps did, and something we should continue to build on. I have in my council career, and I will continue to do so.
You know, I think it's, you know, you get to the idea of dignity of work, and it's so important to have that and create opportunities for that. And Andrew's right, we were both at the same event today, and it was uplifting to see the stories coming out of Uplift Northwest. And it was, you know, for those in transition from whatever situation they may be moving forward. And the program is unbelievable, and it provides that idea of dignity of work. And we see that across other areas too. You know, I think of right now Walter, who sells the real change on top of the hill on Queen Anne. You know, and there's the dignity of work. He's out there working to sell his real change, and you know, it's the thing that we should be supporting. You know, supporting him in that effort, because it goes to the idea, you know, to the core, and you know, provide that opportunity to move forward. And so we should look for other opportunities to do that too. You know, there's other organizations that do great work, as mentioned, the MID and the like, but we need to, you know, have that, you know, as a baseline, if you will, the idea of dignity of work, and look for opportunities to expand.
My name is Stephen. I live on Queen Anne. Thank you both for being here. I'd love you to take a moment to address a big issue. Councilmember Lewis, I understand you were at the mayor's budget presentation this afternoon. Could you each talk about how you see the city closing the anticipated gap of nearly $500 million for the 2025-2026 budget area?
And Bob, you get to start.
This goes again back to good governance, and you know, accountability and transparency can't just be for SPD, can't be just for the elected leaders. It needs to be for all programs within the city government. So the city council needs to make sure that all these programs are accomplishing their goals, that we're getting what we're paying for. And the argument is that that's not the case. And so do we really have a deficit problem, or do we have a budget problem? That's first. Second, the Seattle budget process is crazy with its silos, you know, holding off, banking off money. There's really no issue. I've gotten from people who on authority that say, hey, you know, you can take money from this silo and cover it. So there's not the city doesn't have that problem. The issue is in terms of the structure of the budget and the rules regarding, you know, can we touch this money or no, or you know, all these little pieces that really create this kind of convoluted, you know, process, and which is something that we need to bring some clarity with the next city council to that area. And so the question is, do we really have a deficit problem, or do we have a budget problem?
So we do have a deficit problem. I mean, it's very real. It's a quarter billion is what has been estimated in the mayor's speech. What I think is really right. It had yes. So like $250 million per part of the. We do biannual budgeting. So the budget challenge that we are facing is very real. If we continue to go forward with the amount of spending that we have assumed and accrued over the last decade, it will be a deficit along the lines of $500 million for the biennium, as we were just stating. The city of Seattle has faced an incredible record revenue growth over the past decade, mostly because of the hypercharge building from Amazon building out its campus not very far from here. We have been very fortunate in that respect as a city to have so much wealth and so much growth that's been concentrated. We have not had a reciprocal period of retrenchment in the city government to really determine what are our core functions and what do we want to continue, or how can we do some of the things that we are doing but do them differently. One thing I would be really interested in is departmental consolidations. This is something the city of Seattle used to do. In the past decade, we have separated out a number of different departments. We separated out construction inspections from our planning department, for example. Those are now 2 separate offices. They used to be 1. There are economies of scale that can be realized if you merge and combine departments, significant savings that can be realized. In our last budget, the council actually saved $60 million in ongoing expenses through targeting efficiencies and attrition and just closing vacant positions. That's something that we can continue to do if we can identify departmental pairings that make sense or figure out ways to make the government smaller but not actually have a material decrease in service delivery. That has to be part of it. And we have to continue to also look at new revenue potentially if that's something that we need to do, but that's got to be a last resort.
I promised we were going to stop at 7 o'clock, so we do have closing statements for both of you. I think we originally said you get 2 minutes, but why don't we just make it a minute? You guys have talked quite a bit. I don't know who did the first opening statement and who gets to do the first.
Let's start, I think.
I did, so I think Bob should go.
We'll start with Bob.
You get to do the first closing statement. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Again, thank you, Tom, Belltown United, the West Precinct Advisory Council, the Queen Anne Community Council, the South Lake Union Chamber, obviously Uptown Alliance. Make sure I don't forget anybody, but South Lake, okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, that's really important to know your candidate is, you know, different pieces that really bring up, you know, how they were brought up and, you know, what they bring. And I'm reminded because I'm within 2 weeks of the anniversary of my dad coming to America. My dad passed away 2.5 years ago, but on October 4, 1964, he came to America with, as we say, $80 in his pocket. He was a welder. And you know, he started his life, and my mom came 3 months later. And you know, that really informed me, you know, that life, you know, growing up in a blue-collar working class background, really gave me that grounding and that insight and that perspective that goes to understanding the issues. And I will bring that, you know, to the council in addition to, you know, the experience of mine in the Navy career and also my volunteer career here in Queen Anne and District 7. Again, thank you very much for having us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's been really good to be here and be in a room of people that I've worked on so many projects with over the course of the last 4 years. I just want to say, in terms of my values of what guides me as a council member, I'm a partisan for District 7. I want to advance investment in District 7. I want to advance services in District 7. I will work with anybody if it delivers for the people of District 7. Working with constituents in Belltown, we finally got an activation in the Battery Portal site that was just sitting there vacant in the portal porch, something that's being used by community every time I walk by it. That's a wholly beneficial addition to the community. Since 1950, there's been no major update to the Queen Anne Community Center. We got $19 million to do a complete renovation of the Queen Anne Community Center, something no one thought could be done, something that we got done and we delivered. We came together to pass a Metropolitan Park District to make our parks clean, safe, and open, something that, that we're going to be rolling out, and that we have performance metrics to hold parks accountable to make sure that we're delivering on making sure that Bell Street Park is clean, that Big Howe is clean, that these parks all over the city. And I'm going to continue to work on that as your council member, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both.
I definitely want to thank both our candidates here. They're dedicated to District 7. I want to also thank Jeremy Harris here. I think he's doing a great job. Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to have a 10-minute break. That's all you get, and everyone must come back. County Council is fabulous. You got to hear them. No, Tom Grant. Jeremy's doing a great job. It's because of you, right? We're going to start.
You have the list for the county questions. I didn't.
We are going to start right now, so please return to your seats so we can actually end at 8 o'clock. Please come back in. I need the county council candidates to come forward, Jorge and Sarah. Please take a seat.
No.
So, Jeremy, we're going to let you take it away again, and we're going to follow exactly the same format we did with City Council. It's a pleasure to have County Council here. I think sometimes they get lost in the shuffle, and it's an open seat this year, and I think we're engaging with these candidates, and they want to engage with us.
Excellent. All right. Well, as we kind of settle back in, we will get going with our County Council District 4 candidates. And like last time, we will start with a little introduction and kind of why you're running and an opening statement. And Sarah, we will start with you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me this evening. I am Sarah Reyneveld. I'm running for King County Council position number 4, being vacated by our longtime champion, Councilmember Cole Wells. I'm a public sector attorney. I'm a Seattle Public School mom, a union member, a transit writer, and a 25-year District 4 neighbor. And I have dedicated my 20-year public service career to advancing legal, policy, and budgetary solutions to some of our most pressing challenges. As an assistant attorney general in the Attorney General's office for over 11 years, I have fought for wages and protections for working families and held environmental violators accountable. In 2016, Councilmember Cole Wells appointed me to the King County Women's Advisory Board. And at that time, I was pregnant with my son and struggling to find affordable childcare for my daughter. And I rolled up my sleeves and I worked with my fellow board members to work with both the King County Council and our communities across King County and the executive to establish a childcare subsidy program for working families and a wage provider boost for childcare providers. I have also worked to expand affordable housing, behavioral health, and services for survivors of gender-based violence. We need someone with experienced leaders on these King County Council issues. I have that experienced leadership, and I want to bring that to the King County Council to deliver results for District 4. I am running because we need transformative and bold action at this period of time to meet the scale of the challenges facing our county. I will bring experienced leadership, to address our challenges, particularly affordable housing, expanding access to behavioral health care, as well as public safety solutions, and expanding access to fast, safe, reliable transit. I am a longtime community member, and I want to elevate the needs of the community to deliver results for King County Council. I'm honored to be endorsed by my boss, AG Bob Ferguson, as well as Hillary Franz, many of the county council members, such as Councilmember Colwells, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jorge.
Thank you, Jeremy, and hello, everybody, and thank you to all the organizers of the event. And Tom, I agree. Thank you for highlighting the county council. My favorite story of the canvassing has been somebody telling me, I didn't know we had a county council. So I had to explain to people that we do, in fact, have a county council. So thank you all for being here and engaging in this conversation. My name is Jorge Baron. I am running for District 4 King County Council. I'm a Queen Anne resident. All three of my kids have gone through co-elementary. This year is actually the last year. My wife Tyler is here, so I want to acknowledge her, part of Queen Anne Community Council as well. You know, we've made a life here. We love this neighborhood, and part of the reason that I'm running is because of my deep love for this region and for what I see as its potential, despite some of the challenges that I'm sure we'll be discussing tonight. The reason that I'm running is informed by my lived experience. I'm an immigrant from Colombia. I came to the United States when I was 13. I didn't speak English at the time, and I was bullied for that as an 8th grader. I'm also the proud parent of a trans daughter, and those experiences have really informed my what I see as important in terms of confronting injustice and the importance of fighting for marginalized communities in our society. And I spent the last 2 decades working on behalf of those marginalized communities, the last 15 serving as executive director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, the largest nonprofit immigration legal service provider here in our region. And that's the kind of experience that I hope to bring to the King County Council, the experience of somebody who has been a leader of a large organization, who is going to actually be able to make sure that we are using our resources effectively, who's also has a track record of building coalitions across local jurisdictions, like we heard in the earlier debate. There's a lot of need to work with state and local leaders, and I have a track record of building coalitions and making policy change and progressive policy change. I'm grateful to have been endorsed by the Seattle Times, by The Stranger, by The Urbanist, and a number of local leaders, including council members Sahilai, Colwells, and Balducci, and most importantly, majority of the voters during the primary. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our first questions are going to be about transit, and as many of us rely on the Metro bus system, what would you do as a member of the county council to improve the physical safety both on board and at the bus stops? And as a broader question, but also specifically there on 3rd Avenue, where there are some very pressing safety issues around the transit system there on 3rd Avenue. And we will start with Jorge. Sure. Well, you know, this is an issue that's important to me and my family because all of us are transit riders, and especially my daughter. Actually, she currently attends, I have a 17-year-old who attends Nathan Hale High School, and so she has to actually take 2 different buses at least every day to get back and forth each way to get to school. And she shares with me the experiences of the situations where she has not felt safe, and that's obviously something that obviously I want to make sure that everyone in our community is going to feel safe. And I've also talked to the bus drivers and people who work in our system and want to make sure that they're safe. And so it's really important to make sure that we have responses that are attuned to the actual situations, because there's a lot of situations which might require law enforcement response, and obviously we want to make sure that Metro Transit Police is available and that works with the local jurisdictions to respond to those issues. But we also have situations where somebody needs support that doesn't require a law enforcement response, and we need to be able to scale up the capacity of those responses to make sure that those are in place. I also think that part of what we need to do in talking about, for example, places like 3rd Avenue, is that the county has a critical role in building up our infrastructure to provide behavioral health supports. We just have such a drastic need to invest in that, and I'm grateful that, of course, the voters of the county voted to increase capacity through the Crisis Care Centers levy. That's going to be an important resource. We need to make sure that that implementation happens with speed,
but also with real thinking out how we deploy those resources in an equitable a way that's going to be effective. But I also want to warn people that despite those additional resources, that is still, if you talk to all the folks who are experts in this field, that is not going to be sufficient. So that's an important first step. We need to make sure that those resources are going to be used to make sure that we address the needs of many of the people who we see on 3rd Avenue and other parts in our community, and that they're going to be responsive to the needs, and that we figure out a way to connect that to our metro transit system.
Yeah, so I'm a transit writer. I take the bus to and from work, and I used to go with my son, who was in daycare downtown. He's now in kindergarten. But unfortunately, I think Metro service has really languished since the pandemic, and it hasn't yet been restored. And a lot of people throughout our communities, it's because they don't feel safe riding transit. And I have personally experienced this, and I think we need to scale up solutions to really ensure that everyone in our communities feels safe riding transit. I think one of the things in terms of I've been a longtime transit champion, and I'm proud to be endorsed by Seattle Subway and the Transit Writers Union. I think we absolutely need to boost transit, not just to meet our kind of goals in terms of our carbon reduction goals in King County, but also could get people out of cars and into transit to really deal with a lot of our congestion issues. So this is going to be a critical priority of mine, is ensuring buses are safe for everyone. I am proud to be endorsed by ATU Washington, and I've had many conversations with our bus operators as well as our mechanics, but particularly bus operators, around what their safety concerns are. And we really have to, I think, give them the credit that they are due, because they are in many ways first responders to a lot of these critical issues that we've been dealing with in our community, our homelessness crisis, our behavioral health crisis, a lot of the fentanyl issues that we've seen in our community. And that's not right. They have a job to do, so we need to do more to support them. So I want to ensure that we are elevating solutions that are coming directly from our bus operators as well as our community members. That means scaling up enforcement if someone's actually breaking the law, but it also means expanding out our transit ambassador program so that everyone feels safe, and in addition to security around transit systems. I've also talked to the bus operators about potentially getting a QR code where we could actually report in real time incidences on buses. I think as transit writers, we all have to be part of that solution, and reporting crime when we see it is also going to be a critically important part of the puzzle to ensuring that we have safe transit for all.
Thank you. And staying on this topic, when it comes to the bus stops themselves, we've seen we can hear them sometimes at night out there cleaning the bus stops, and I'm like, man, they're out there in the middle of the night, they're cleaning up all this stuff, but yet they can be turned over fairly quickly and be an environment where it's not inviting for people to come and get on the bus. What can the county do to improve the physical environment at some of the bus stops? And we will start with Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a critically important issue. We were actually all coming out on a forum on Friday, and Councilmember Bauducci is a transit writer, and she, I think, tweeted out an image of a bus stop that was fully restored, that had lighting, that was inviting, that seemed equitable and inviting to the community. So I think we need to invest more in ensuring that our bus stops are well kept, that there is lighting, that they are also secure. And part of that, I think, is ensuring that in certain instances, we do have security and other supports for certain bus stops. This idea of kind of transit ambassadors, I think, is also critically important in this regard, so that, when folks get on the bus, they actually they feel safe and secure as well. I think that there's a huge disparity with bus stops in terms of just the level of shelter, how they kind of in general are supportive of community infrastructure, whether they're sheltered, whether there's a bench, and that sort of thing. And so I think making sure that we have a standard, that our bus stops are inviting, that there's shelter, especially with elements like the rain, I think is going to be critically important. I am all about community involvement, so I want to hear from you if there's a bus stop that you don't feel is inviting, if there isn't an aspect of shelter, if you don't feel like it's safe. I think that King County Metro should be leading on really responding to those issues, and it's all about increasing access to transit. And I think making our bus stops safe, making them connected, and also just welcoming places for the community is part of increasing access to public transportation throughout our region and ensuring folks feel safe riding transit.
Thank you. Jorge.
Yeah, no, I think this is an important issue, and in fact, I'm reminded I had a recent tour with our colleagues of Uptown Alliance, and seeing the shelter over in Queen Anne Avenue and Mercer. And I think one of the things that I see as a challenge sometimes, and this goes back to the point about people not knowing there's a county council, that their jurisdictional boundaries are something that like we don't see in our community, but you get into these issues sometimes that and I've seen it in my nonprofit work that gets into actually effective solutions, and so sometimes we see this pushing back on like who's responsible for what, and it makes it complicated for community groups, for citizens to know who to respond to. And I think one of the things that I'd like to do as a council member at the county level is to make sure that I'm working across those jurisdictional lines and not be pushing kind of back and forth, but just figuring out working together to make sure you have solutions to the issues, and working with our city partners, working with Metro to make sure that we address those issues and that there's resources available to make sure that those spaces where people are going to board buses are clean, safe, well lit, and helpful to people. I think the other challenge that we're confronting, I will say, with Metro and some of its operations that I think is important to make sure that all of you are aware of is that part of the problem with some of the challenges that Metro is facing is a shortage of workers. And so for me, this is another issue that we need to work on broadly, because if we don't have enough workforce, that's part of the challenge that we're having right now in terms of preventing us from having the capacity, for having the staffing to make sure that all of these places are resourced and the system is operating efficiently and safely. And so that requires us to be making sure that we are investing in our workforce, that we make sure that we have affordable housing, because if people can't afford to live in the communities that they're serving, they're going to go find work somewhere else, and it's going to be more difficult for us to attract people to be here and to work in jobs like in Metro. And finally, we also need to make sure that we have affordable childcare. That's another big component of making sure that we have a workforce available, is that a lot of people do the math and think that I can't take that job because I'm not going to be able to do it if I can't afford childcare for my children. And so those are factors that we need to consider as well when we talk about these issues.
In both of your answers, you have said you've talked with those Metro drivers who have been kind of on the front lines of dealing with a lot of the broader issues that we have in Seattle. I've also talked to them, I've done stories with them. And one thing I've heard from those Metro drivers is they are frustrated with Metro and with the Public Health Department, or with Seattle, Public Health King County, Seattle, about their response to the fentanyl crisis on board the buses. How would you rate the Metro's response to that situation, and what do you think needs to be done to listen to those bus drivers going forward? Jorge, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say that we need to rate it as a community, and our community response is not sufficient. I think we are failing right now because we do not have sufficient treatment capacity for folks who have substance use disorders to be able to get the care they need. And I agree that this issue is a public health crisis that we have in our communities. We are losing so many neighbors to the epidemic of opioid disorders, particularly because of fentanyl. I think it's exacerbating the situation because of the lethality of that particular drug. And so I think part of the challenge is, Metro Transit is not a public health agency, right? They need to be able to work in concert with public health professionals and need to be able to have places where people with substance use disorders can turn to and can be placed. But right now, even for folks who want to get treatment, there's not sufficient capacity to meet that treatment. And so that's where we need to scale up the resources. And I have to say, I'm concerned. I don't know, we talked earlier about the deficit at the city level, and I hope you all know that the county is facing some of the same challenges for different reasons with regard to the revenue picture at the county level because of some restrictions at the state level. But right now, the county is expecting a $100 million shortfall in its next biennial budget, and where we expect that a chunk of those cuts will be in our public health infrastructure. And I'm deeply concerned about that because that's precisely one of those areas that we need to be investing more on. And so cutting back on our public health infrastructure right now feels like the exact opposite of what we should be doing, when we should be investing in those resources, expanding capacity for treatment options so that people have a place to go. And so that, we stop the cycle because, you know, we can remove people from buses, we can remove them from the street, but if they don't actually get healthy, we're going to just continue to be in this cycle that we've seen in our community.
Sarah, and the question is, how would you rate Metro's response to the fentanyl crisis on board the buses, and what should be done to protect the drivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of Metro's response, I think we do need to elevate the voice of the communities and particularly bus operators. But I have talked to bus operators lately. I've been endorsed by ATU, and they think that King County Metro is failing. And there is actually a crisis on the bus when it comes to fentanyl. And I mean failing not in the sense of, you know, we can't do something about it, but that more needs to be done. And I think when you look, for example, at the UW study that kind of evaluated the impacts of fentanyl on bus operators, I think that was telling part of the story. But there's also a larger picture of the story, which is the cumulative effects of fentanyl on buses to bus operators, as well as just some of the symptoms around the mental health effects of dealing with witnessing that sort of public drug consumption. I think that we need to do more to support our bus operators in this crisis, and investing in upscale solutions is absolutely the answer. As an assistant attorney general, I have served on the AGOA opioid task force, and I know what it's going to take for us to truly respond to the fentanyl crisis in King County. And we are not doing enough to scale up medicated assistance treatment on demand. We are not doing enough to scale up treatment hubs, and we are not doing enough to form effective law enforcement partnerships that'll ensure that we're effectively prosecuting dealers and others in our community and stopping just the inflow of drugs in our community. So we need to do all those things in order to address this crisis. We also need to do more in the context of King County Metro to make sure that we have our bus operators back. And I suggested and had talked about some of those recommendations that came directly from bus operators, including doing more for reporting, more bus ambassadors, as well as security to make sure that we're timely reporting usage on buses and also directing folks into upstream solutions such as housing and treatment.
Moving on to the Regional Homelessness Authority, of course, King County is a significant funder, along with the City of Seattle and others, to the Regional Homelessness Authority. They're currently looking for a permanent CEO. What do you hope that CEO, the new RHA CEO, will be able to bring to the table, and what will be your guiding principles as a county council member as it relates to governance of the RHA and accountability? And Jorge, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think one of the key things for the Regional Homelessness Authority is to make sure that it is doing its job of administering contracts and working in partnership with the nonprofit agencies that are providing services in a way that's effective and respectful of their work. I think it was very problematic that we had an agency that was not paying nonprofit providers at time. I mean, as a leader of a nonprofit agency, I can tell you that, you know, we can't, as nonprofits, say we're not going to pay our staff, right? And so for government to be, you know, we have the system right now where so much of our human services infrastructure is done through this nonprofit sector, right? And we could talk about the wisdom of that or not, but if we have that system, we absolutely need the government agencies to make sure that they're actually paying providers to be able to do the work. And that was not happening, and that's something that needs to change, and we're still working on that. And that's something that as somebody who has been working in that sector, I will make sure that our government agencies are operating in such a way that they're making the work of the very hard work that nonprofits and their staff are providing to our community, that they're doing it in a way that's effective and efficiently, because that's crucial to the functioning of our human services capacity. So that's going to be really important. I think the other thing that I think I'm going to be looking at in making sure that we have a leader for the agency is somebody who can you know, work on those operational details, but at the same time can set a path for us to make progress in you know, quantifiable steps. And I know we have, you know, kind of long-term plans, but I also think, you know, what we did in the nonprofit sector is have work plans of short-term benchmarks that we're going to meet. And I think the area where we have to have the most urgency is dealing with people who currently don't have shelter and expanding emergency shelter capacity to make sure that we can move people. With homelessness, the long-term solution has to be housing, right? But at the same time, we need to be working on both the long-term and the immediate short-term.
Yeah, I think the opportunity for a new CEO is really a great opportunity for a reset of the authority. I've talked to so many neighbors, I've doorbelled thousands of doors, and I've heard that people are concerned that the authority is not delivering on the outcomes and the results, and that there's a lack of accountability in the current structure. And that is resulting in some of the issues that Jorge mentioned around a lack of equitable and efficient service delivery, making sure that we're following through with our contractual obligations, but it's also resulting in a failure to really meet the goals of the 5-year plan, which is rapidly rehousing and bringing our unhoused neighbors indoors. So I look at this as an opportunity for a reset. I would love to serve on the governing board of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I think we need a change in governance structure to increase accountability and drive results. What I would like to see is a consolidation of the governance structure, so we don't have the implementation in the governance board, but that we have one central board similar to the Department of Health that is really responsible for oversight and making sure the agency meets its goals of delivering on emergency shelter and vital services for our unhoused neighbors. So I'm going to be laser focused when elected at ensuring that we have a reset and increasing the governance of the authority to drive results. I also agree that we need to improve outcomes by rapidly investing in shelter capacity, both emergency shelter, tiny homes. We heard City Council member Lewis talk about the importance of tiny homes and expanding out things like health through housing to really get our unhoused neighbors housed. I will say we have been dramatically under-investing in shelter units. And with a reset of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, I think we can dramatically increase emergency shelter, get folks rapidly rehoused. Finally, I would just say I think this is a huge opportunity to increase relationships with the other cities across King County and ensure we're incentivizing them to invest in the authority in the way that Seattle and King County is.
And a follow-up to that, Sarah, and then Jorge, I'll have you respond to this. You mentioned the tiny homes. One of the biggest issues has been finding places to host these units. I reported there's 200 tiny homes in a lot down in Soto that are not being used because there are not sufficient sites to put them. We've also seen major delays in terms of siting an RV safe lot, which is going in an inner bay, but that project in and of itself is being delayed significantly. As a county council member, how can you overcome this obstacle of actually finding sites for this and navigating what can be a difficult road and putting these into some of the neighborhoods here in this district?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the authority has a critical role to play in that regard and making sure that we are not only finding sites in an equitable way that's really centering the voices of our unhoused communities as well as our communities that are going to be impacted, but also incentivizing other cities, which is peering into other cities, to come to the table and ensure that they're producing enough shelter capacity. Because I think for a long time it's been Seattle and other cities that are stepping up, but we need to provide, I think, the appropriate incentives as well as look at policy directives to ensure that we're also scaling up shelter capacity and that we're ensuring throughout King County and that we're ensuring that those municipal governments throughout King County are also investing in shelter capacity to meet the needs of our unhoused neighbors. So how are we going to do this? First, we absolutely need to focus in on Council District 4 that we're having an ongoing community conversation around the benefits of things like tiny homes to our district. I have met with the King County, with the Magnolia Community Council, for example, and many of the community councils throughout our district. And, they've had a great relationship with our tiny home villages. And so I think it's specifically theirs. And I think it's really about building those relationships and building on those sorts of success stories. I also think King County has a lot of authority to really ensure that we are purchasing new land, as well as ensuring that we're working in partnership with other governments, including the city and our municipal colleagues, to make sure that we're maximizing the purchasing and building of new shelter capacity as well as tiny homes. And I think the Health Through Housing Initiative partnership, which to my understanding has stood up almost 1,700 units of permanent supportive housing as an example of that. So I think we need to be using that authority appropriately, bringing people to the table, and really ensuring that we are driving results in this way. We don't have time to waste, and I'm going to be laser focused on this priority.
Thank you, Jorge.
Yeah, for me, I think expanding the capacity is so important. I think it's important to highlight that part of the challenge that we're facing is that we're kind of losing ground in terms of shelter capacity. The number of people who need that kind of emergency shelter capacity has grown by around 50% over the last 10 years, and then the capacity has only grown, the shelter capacity has only grown by 10%. And so we need to making sure that we scale up the capacity to meet the current demand. And again, I want to emphasize that when we're talking about homelessness, we got to also be working on having housing, because the long-term capacity, we're not going to get out of the homelessness crisis unless we're also investing in making sure that we have housing long-term for people, because that's the ultimate driver of the challenges that we've had. And I always want to remind folks that in some ways, it's partly because we are a successful region, right? A lot of people have wanted to come here, and that's led to, you know, and we haven't responded with sufficient housing capacity, and so we need to be making sure that we keep that in mind. In terms of how we deliver that, I think we need to make sure that part of the challenge that I see with the Regional Homelessness Authority is that the scope is very broad in what it's trying to do, and I think we need to help it prioritize and particularly focus on this emergency shelter capacity, including things like tiny home villages. And I think it's important to also make sure that we're working at the county level as the kind of regional source of government. It's our role to make sure that we are helping the authority to make sure that we move away the red tape that can get in the way of making sure that we actually build that shelter capacity as quickly as possible. And I think that's really important. We need to work with our state legislative partners to make sure that we find the resources and we find the revenue to make sure that we make those investments. And that's what I've been successful at, is working across different jurisdictions, across different levels of government to be able to actually enact solutions. That's the approach that I would take at the county council and that I would use to make sure that we're addressing the crisis with the urgency that it deserves.
And follow up to that for both of you, how do you measure success with the Homelessness Authority? And what do you say to members in your district who may say, we of course want to support homelessness services, but we're not confident that we're getting a great return on our investment from RHA? Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. I think one measure of success is increasing participation in the authority. As I stated before, I think that we're not going to meet the homeless crisis, and we're not going to bring everyone indoors, which is the mission of the authority, to ensure that everyone is housed, unless we truly get regional participation in what is a regional effort. And so if elected, I will be laser focused on ensuring that I am continuing to develop relationships with the 39 cities across King County and bringing them to the table so that we have sufficient funding to really drive results to ensure that we're bringing our unhoused neighbors indoors. I think the other measure of success is that we have equitable service delivery. That is one of the measures of success, in the 5-year plan, is ensuring that we're delivering services to our unhoused neighbors. I mean, whether or not that's through permanent supportive housing, behavioral health services, substance use crisis services, those sorts of services need to be delivered in an equitable manner. They are part of addressing the root cause of what we see with our unhoused neighbors, and they're critically important. And then in addition to that, I would say we absolutely need to expand the amount of shelter capacity that we need to bring people indoors. So I think that needs to start with 7,000 more units of shelter capacity throughout King County. We are dramatically underproducing shelter capacity. And I don't just mean emergency shelter capacity. I mean tiny homes. I mean more permanent housing. I mean that just in general housing in order to rapidly rehouse folks. So those are the 3 things that I would focus on, but I have to reiterate that we need to get this governance structure right. We need to bring folks to the table, and we need to have a shared vision for what this authority will deliver in terms of a solution to our homelessness crisis. And until we get the governance structure right, I don't think we're going to be meeting our goals.
Thank you, Jorge.
Well, Jeremy, for me, obviously the ultimate measure of success is that we don't see unsheltered homelessness in our community, right? I think that's the ultimate measure that we need to be doing. When we talk about homelessness, we talk about a range of situations, and obviously when I think the authority measures homelessness, it includes people who might be in an unstable situation but are actually living in a residence somewhere. I think the focus with more urgency is with folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, because that's the most urgent. It doesn't mean that we don't work on the other issues. As I mentioned, we need to work on the affordable housing issues to make sure that we have the housing capacity long term. But the urgent situation that I see is for those folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Part of the challenge that I see in my conversations with folks who provide these services is that the current capacity, not only do we need to increase the capacity, but we also need to make sure that we have capacity to provide the extended services for the folks who are going to have a harder time. Because right now, a lot of our shelter capacity is being used by folks who are relatively stable in other ways, and that makes sense, right? They're kind of in a better place. But a lot of folks that are not sheltered right now are folks who have serious substance use disorders, who might have serious mental health issues, or a combination of the two, who might have involvement in the criminal legal system in the past, and that makes serving those community members more challenging. And so we need to have besides the capacity, we need to have the supportive structure, right? What I talked about earlier about behavioral health capacity, we need to be working on many fronts to make sure that those folks are going to be stabilized, because otherwise, long term, we're not going to actually solve the issue if we're not providing those folks the supports they need to be able to be successful and address their public health concerns. So for me, it's important to be working on multiple fronts, and that's part of what I hope to achieve, is to create that coordination at the regional level, which is, I think, where the county plays an important role.
Thank you. We heard in the city council debate from both candidates that there were concerns about the county jail. As a member of the county council, what do you believe needs to happen with regards to booking restrictions at the jail, and should the jail be rebuilt? And we will start with Jorge. We'll start with you.
So I think, right now we have a situation that I think is untenable, which is that we have not been adequately making sure that people who are in the custody of the county are sufficiently being cared for. And I think it's important that we recognize as a community that, there can be debates as to who belongs in the jail, right? That we can have debates as to what constitutes a situation where somebody's going to be deprived of liberty and put in a jail. But I hope we can all agree that once we make that decision to put somebody in jail, that they become kind of our community responsibility to make sure that they're getting cared for and that they're going to be safe in that space. And unfortunately, we've had a situation over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, particularly since the pandemic, where we haven't been meeting that criteria, in my opinion, because we've had several deaths at the facility, and I think the conditions are leading to those unsafe situations. So we need to urgently address that. And I think in the short term, we need to look at things like potentially booking restrictions to make sure that we are providing that safe environment. I think long term, the thing that we need to sort of really ask ourselves is, where are we going to put resources? Because about 2/3 of our general fund monies at the county level are going to the category that's listed as justice and safety, which also includes other parts of the civil court system. But we're putting less and less resources on the areas where we need to make sure that we can prevent and lead to less criminal activity in the future. There's a program, for example, Teen Child, that is funded out of the general fund, which is really important, works with at-risk youth, really important and has been shown evidence-based approaches to reduce incarceration and youth recidivism. Those are the kind of programs that could be at risk of getting cut from the general fund. And so my concern is that we don't reduce resources there for those programs that are actually going to promote public safety long term.
Thank you.
Yes, we have a crisis at our King County Jail, and we are failing too many vulnerable individuals that are in our custody. And, we might be, King County might be in violation of an ongoing settlement agreement they've had to provide not just mental health supports, but access to treatment, and other services for inmates in the jail. And we have a staffing crisis. The jail, unfortunately, is incredibly overcrowded. So we need to do more to ensure that we're addressing the issues with our staffing crisis and making sure we're adequately paying and recruiting officers, because in order to get folks, out of solitary confinement, we absolutely need to hire more officers to kind of meet the requirements of that settlement agreement. So we have a lot of big issues that are impacting a very vulnerable population. And I think the King County Council is just now stepping up and doing more to ensure that we're recruiting officers and that we're dealing with some of the long-term crises at the jail that resulted in the deaths of, I think, 6 individuals just last year, which, as we know, is unacceptable. Many of them were highly vulnerable. They needed treatment, they needed services, and we're failing those individuals. I think there's many things that we need to do to address this crisis. One of them is the staffing issue that King County Council has currently put some resources towards addressing. One of them is that there's about 100 people right now that are currently in King County Jail that are in mental health crisis, that are awaiting constitutionally mandated restoration services. And we do not have enough mental health beds right now to get those folks the services that they are entitled to. King County recently sued the state because of this issue. We need to make sure that we're expanding mental health beds to get those folks out of incarceration and address some of the issues that we have with overstaffing in our jails. After that, we can look at things like booking restrictions.
Excellent. I think we should open it up to some questions from the audience.
So we need some questions out here. If someone new, you have to say your name.
Hi, my name's John. I live on Salmon Bay, houseboat. I want to ask about a settlement that the county and the city agreed to, which had to do with combined sewer overflows. The city and the county are investing in a big pipe, from Queen Anne over to Fremont that then goes into a big tank, which goes all the way to the sewage treatment plant. What are you thinking about why the county and the city agreed that they were going to not stop polluting, but just do less polluting? Because they have agreed in the settlement with the feds that they won't do more than one little overflow event, which is about 20 million gallons of sewage into our waters. So King County has the responsibility for where it goes to. You're handling it when it gets to the treatment plants. So what do you think that the county should be doing to improve its services to us as citizens related to that issue? Was I clear?
Yeah, I'm fine with taking this question first as a fellow Ballard resident and an environmental attorney. This issue is near and dear to my heart. I think that King County has more of an obligation to ensure that there aren't any spills from our wastewater treatment plants, including, our treatment plant in Magnolia to begin with. And so I think some of the issues around redundancy and electricity issues and some of the things that have resulted in the past in the wastewater overflows need to be addressed long term. And I agree with you that it's critically important to make sure that we are addressing those issues and dealing with addressing any sort of sources of pollution. So I want to look at a few things. One of them is just capacity issues of our wastewater treatment plants, particularly the West Point plant in Magnolia, and making sure that we have sufficient capacity. I also think we need to do more with just looking at the nutrient overflows and whether or not we have kind of the proper upgrades in our system to actually be addressing some of that source of pollution at the source. And I'm not that familiar with that particular suit or agreement. But I have heard from many in the environmental community that they're not satisfied with what King County has done in terms of nutrient overflows and just the ongoing source of pollution. And it's frustrating because I'm not sure that we have some leaders that are working on this issue, but I'm not sure we have the sense of urgency that we need to really make sure that King County is complying long term. So I will say, as someone that's been endorsed by the Washington Conservation Action as an environmental attorney at the Attorney General's office, I'm going to be laser focused in making sure we're expanding capacity and the infrastructure we need to really get at this long-term source of pollution and address this issue so that we can ensure that Puget Sound and our natural resources are vibrant and strong.
Thank you for your question, and I absolutely agree that we need to make sure that we're protecting our environment and not doing just like, just not that much pollution, right? Our goal should be make sure that we're not polluting the environment in which we live and which we all enjoy, and part of the reason that many of us chose to live in this area. I think one of the things that I see in government, coming from outside of government and looking at that perspective, is that we don't do enough to look down the road. And I think it's partly because elected officials have these short terms, right? Like if either Sarah or I get elected, we'll serve a 3-year term because we change the timeline. Most of the time it's 4 years, right? But so there's almost like a disincentive for politicians to think of like the long term, right? Because it's the short term pain now, and the benefits don't accrue until after you're out of office frequently. And that's not what I want to do. I want to solve the problems and address the issues long term, because I got 3 kids in this region. I want to leave them an environment that I can be proud of. And for me, it's not going to be good enough to say that we're just polluting only a little bit, and we agree with the city or the feds that that's good enough, right, for government work, as they say. So for me, it's going to be investing in that infrastructure, and I think there are ways that we can do that. I have a lot to say about how we fund essential services at the county, but the other strategy that we can use, particularly when it comes to kind of capital projects like this, is our bonding capacity, right? We can spread out the cost over time, and those kind of investments are the important things that are actually going to address issues, where we can build infrastructure that is going to be responsive. We can also tap into federal resources, like the federal infrastructure bill, and look for opportunities to bring that. And that's the capacity that I've had of working with state partners. I'm endorsed by people like Representative Pramila Jayapal. I've worked with leaders like Senator Murray in the past to work on federal issues on the immigration level. Those are the kind of relationships that I want to build to make sure that we bring those investments, to make sure that we're addressing those issues, because here in our community, I think we should be able to find the resources to be able to address those capital projects and ensure our environment is protected long term.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here tonight. Debbie Froster, resident of Uptown and with Uptown Alliance. The creative economy is a huge regional issue here that has really been hurt from COVID with closing down of a lot of the venues and things. People don't realize that within Seattle Center, we see 4 times as many people as Yellowstone National Park. Our workers can't live close by. They can't ride buses late at night when venues are out. The buses don't run that late at schedule. What is your thoughts on how to support the creative economy at a regional level for this area?
Jorge. Yeah, no, I think it's important, and I think it's important to remind all of us that the creative economy here in Washington State is about 11% of our GDP. I heard the estimate is about 18% in the Seattle area. So it is a huge part of our economy, and that's important to remember. It's also important to understand that that's something that's enriches our community, that inspires us. So something that I'm definitely committed to supporting. I've been grateful that that's been part of our family as well. My middle daughter is very much into musical theater. She went through Seattle Children's Theater and at the Seattle Center, and we very much value that experience for her. And I want to make sure that all residents of the county have access to those services. So I know the county council currently is considering a proposal that is going to expand access. I think that's an important proposal. I think I have to note that one of the concerns that I have about the mechanism that we use to fund those services is the use of the sales tax, which continues to exacerbate the regressive nature of our tax structure here in our community. But I think if we are able to find a proposal that's going to focus those resources on making sure that access is equitable across the county and for all residents of a county, I think that could be a good solution. But I think it goes to the points that we've talked about before about how do we ensure that we have an infrastructure. You talked about transportation, right? How do we ensure that we have a sound transit system that is going to help us? I mean, imagine, hopefully not too long from the future, having a sound transit that is going to be able to bring people from across the county efficiently from the east side, from the south King County to the Seattle Center to enjoy the richness of the artistic experience, the creativity that we have there. And so for me, it's going to be focusing those, making sure that we're doing the work to make sure that those projects are done on time, to have the infrastructure to support those agencies while addressing the short-term impacts that we talked about before.
I think that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
No worries. This is just such a critically important question. And before I wanted to be a county council member and before I wanted to be an assistant attorney general, I wanted to be a ballerina. And the arts in my life have been incredibly important, not just as someone who aspired to be an artist, but as a patron of the arts, particularly the ballet and the opera and local theater venues and on the boards and all of the institutions and I think art houses in the 4th Council District that make it vibrant and that inspire us. And so I think we need to do everything we can at this moment in time when so many of our arts houses and our arts community is in crisis because of the effects of the pandemic to ensure that we are investing in the cultural economy. And it's important to note that by cultural economy, and Jorge gave an important statistic, we don't just mean the good union-paying jobs, many of them that are produced, through directly as artists, or folks that support the arts, or work in our art houses, but we mean our restaurants and our cafes and our hotels and the surrounding businesses that really benefit from this cultural community that we've created. And we have to make sure at this critical moment in time that we support them. And I do think we differ a little on this, which is that I would absolutely be an affirmative vote for the Cultural Access Fund, and I'd want to champion implementation of that fund because we absolutely have to guarantee that these arts houses and our communities that depend on them have the institutional support and operational funding, and as well as the cultural access that make our communities rich, vibrant, and that we're ensuring equitable access to these great institutions. So absolutely supporting the Cultural Access Fund as well as artist housing. I think there's even more we can do with a light rail coming through Ballard and some of the links to connect our communities to these art houses. Let's make sure that our communities are vibrant and that we continue to support a thriving arts, cultural, and historic community in Council District 4.
I think that was a great question, Debbie, to end on a positive note here. We are going to end the questions now. I do want to thank Seattle Unity again, and we had also a representative on Westpac that has been a stalwart volunteer, Tracy Roberts. So let's give both of them a round of applause. You have to stay for the 1-minute closing statements. It's 1 minute now. And let's give another round of applause to Jeremy Harris. That he does an amazing job of keeping this going. So Sarah, you're first this time?
I went first.
Okay, so Jorge, you're first.
I'll take it first, no problem. Well, thank you, Tom, again, for hosting this event. Thank you all for staying late. I appreciate this. This is what inspires me about running for office, is people like all of you who are, engaged in this democratic process, who want to make our community better, and that's why I have faith that we're going to be able to solve the challenges that we have in this county. So thank you for being here. I'm honored for the possibility of running. I am a firm believer that strong values can build stronger communities. That's the reason that I'm running for office. That's what I have to bring. You know, I can tell you how great I am, but that's kind of self-serving, so I'm going to tell you what the Seattle Times said about me. They said that the challenges of the county require bold, creative leadership from the Metropolitan King County Council. Barone has the experience, skills, and passion needed to help craft policy for county government. That's how I see my work, that I want to bring the experience that I've had outside of government to be a leader of an effective organization and the nonprofit sector, bring that executive experience to work for you at the county council to make sure that we have effective work at the county level, at the regional level. So thank you, and I hope to earn your support.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of you for having us this evening, for this important conversation, for the work that you do to make our communities a better place, and to our sponsors. As I stated before, I'm running for King County Council because we need bold and transformative action at this moment in time to meet the scale of the challenges that are facing our region. And I will bring experience, solutions, and really tangible leadership on issues around addressing our affordable housing, our homelessness crisis, expanding access to safe, fast, reliable transit to everyone in our community, and improving our public safety so that folks in their communities feel safe and supported. I have been working on these issues as chair and a member of the King County Women's Advisory Board, working collaboratively with our communities. And I bring unmatched experience working on the very same issues that we need leadership on in this moment in time. I want to continue my partnerships with communities and continue this conversation with all of you, and I'd be honored to earn your support. Thank you.
Wraps up this evening. Thank all of you for attending. Appreciate it.